Why are there no high-end Chinese dishes? Based on my observation, the so-called high-end dishes are basically high-class dishes. Firstly, there are high-end Chinese dishes, especially in Beijing because of the Manchurian Qing dynasty's influence that a lot of Qing nobles' cooking methods were later on distributed to the locals after the revolution. But the problem of many of the dishes, similar to the British foods with those sophisticated table manners, is that in the Chinese context the Qing noble foods are not tasty enough to be high-end. Some cookers till today still emphasize, this is what the emperor liked to eat, this is how they did it back then, rather than if they are really tasty or not. So those dishes are very regional and cannot be spread out to other parts of the country. Their fame and historical value exceed their content. Comparing with that, foods from Sichuan areas, for example, are very low-end, but the homeless and beggars favor like hot pot is able to be famous nationwide, and what's more they continue to improve and learn from others without the high-class ancestor burden. Secondly, I assume it is the same logic that some argue that the population in the warmed area or men living in the areas where average women being beautiful tend to be less competitive than others. Since generally speaking, most of the local diets of Chinese foods are in my subjective opinion way above the average of the world, there is a lack of motivation for the restaurants to sell the so-called high-end food as the demand from consumers for those foods is low. Based on my observation, only in the areas where foods are not tasty, they like to sell you some high-class gestures or table manners like one can't drink a bowl of soup without a spoon or can't make noise when chewing or a waiter bothering you 24/7 or cakes mixed with ice creams in various shapes, make the environment romantic, and everyone dresses up properly, just to eat some porky ribs and drink some wine and have intercourse afterward and etc. to charge the hell out of you. That even spread to China years ago as I watched a video that an old man claimed the orthodox and ancient way of drinking tea by using the cap to scratch the cup several times against the Western, uncivilized way of just drinking the tea directly. That nonsense existed mainly because the food isn't tasty. If it is tasty, then eating the food is like having or at least watching to finish yourself. That I couldn't think of any manner one could have except mutual respect and health in an acceptable scale. Thirdly, what it really means by high-end dishes in the Chinese context is those expensive restaurants that have a good environment like private rooms, air conditioners, TV, gambling, karaoke, massages and prostitution nearby or inside. Their foods and drinks indeed tend to be very expensive while the foods taste just normal except that they are indeed in good shape. But as I said, those restaurants do not sell their foods but their service, and networking for the rich businessmen and corrupted politicians or someone having a birthday or family friend reunion. The foods themselves don't deserve that price. China is very different from Europe. In addition to the ideological and cultural difference between centralization and democracy, it is also reflected in the diet. Europeans and Americans like to eat cold dishes, and Chinese people like to eat hot dishes. It is said that only one dish is similar to Chinese food and Western food. Yes, that's pasta. Chinese food has a history of 5,000 years, but why are Chinese dishes not high-end in the eyes of foreigners? Although the country's soft culture is now being promoted as the country grows stronger, some things are gradually being accepted by foreigners, such as the popular pig trotters, some time ago. The British never used to eat it. Speaking of its benefits, it is now difficult for Chinese in Britain to eat trotters. But there is one problem that must be said, that is, in the eyes of Europeans and Americans, our Chinese food is low-end, the food eaten by the lower class. Most of the upper class people try, if they really want to taste Asian food, they may choose Japanese food in their minds. Japanese cuisine is authentic. Of course, they think that the best is French cuisine, which is also the first choice for dining. When it comes to high-end, then we have to talk about the display. Chinese food is a sign of good quality and low price. In short, the food is delicious, the price is cheap, and the appearance of the plate is relatively sloppy. After all, it will soon eat so much in the stomach. Why do you care so much? French food or Japanese food is different. In addition to cooking chefs, we will also hire chefs who lay out dishes, and update the way of arranging dishes from time to time. Of course, the dishes look very beautiful. Secondly, although Chinese food is delicious, it is made from condiments. Foreign countries have also reported that because of its own toxic ingredients such as cinnamon and star anise, as well as salt and monosodium glutamate, the foreign media do promote Chinese people to eat Chinese food. Although China is strong now, the country was still poor in the early days, just a few years ago. The national living standard is not high. Our image is not good in the eyes of foreigners. What we eat is in their eyes. The poor people eat it. Yes, foreigners who eat Chinese food are poor. The last is the eating environment. Now everyone may think it's not bad, but it wasn't the case before. Picking teeth during eating and spitting are all Chinese. As I said, everyone understands that I am not Meiyang. There is also the fact that Chinese people like to speak loudly when they are eating. It is very noisy. Although foreigners are not blindly quiet, they are very quiet in the bar and in the restaurant. They also eat very quietly. The food culture is different. So they can accept Japanese cuisine. In fact, the so-called high, low, and high grades abroad are based on service. Speaking of foreign restaurants, naturally think of Michelin. Usually, what we call Michelin restaurants, especially Samsung and some 2 stars, get a 10% tip, and this tip is actually a service fee. According to the first plate, main course, dessert after dinner, every time we'll change the knife and fork dishes. The meal time is also unlimited. For example, the Samsung Michelin chain in Tokyo Women's Book. This French restaurant also has a branch in Hong Kong, with a per capita consumption of RMB 2,000.